Produced by Podcast Architects.
You're listening to the Lead On podcast, where we discuss experiences in the armed forces while exploring lessons from military leaders.
Howdy, everyone. Welcome back to Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders, the podcast from the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. I'm David Deary with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, and joining me today is David Carter. David did 34 years in the Navy, retired as a Master Chief Petty Officer. His position was that of a Force Master Chief. He was in charge of a part of the force of the Navy, and I'll let him explain that to you. David, good morning.
Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you for joining us today as we explore different leadership lessons that we experienced in the Navy and how what we learned, what we experienced, good and bad, can be imparted onto the civilian community and maybe motivate them to hire veterans and to consider us beyond technical experts, but leaders first. But before we get going, I always like to start with just kind of a fun question, Dave. So as leaders, we tend to offer advice. And it's a lot of times it's unsolicited. But what's the worst piece of leadership advice somebody ever gave you? Could be before the Navy or even after the Navy.
Yeah, I was thinking about that one, and nothing popped to mind immediately about a worst piece of leadership advice. But I think I kind of turned it into every bit of advice you're given is useful in some form or fashion. There are some things that, like one of my first chiefs told me, as a budding leader, you want to get yourself a wheel book, and you're familiar with that term, David, as a wholesaler. But for the viewing audience, it's just a little notebook, a little green notebooks that we used to get from the supply system.
It was the first Palm Pilot.
Yes, yeah, it was the original Palm Pilot.
Which people probably don't even know what a Palm Pilot is. So I guess we got to segue from a wheel book to a Palm Pilot to the iPhone.
Yeah. That's an excellent way to look at it. So anyway, but the advice I was given is, when you're experiencing leadership or viewing leadership and you're trying to get takeaways from it, what you want to do is in the front of the wheel book, write down all those good leadership attributes and use them regularly. In the back of the book, you write down all those bad leadership attributes, and those are the ones you want to forget about and don't use. And so along the way, you learn these things, you pick up these things, and I think I just found, I don't think I've ever really received a bit of leadership advice that I thought that just was like, what? But there are certain things along the way or attributes I saw along the way that I said, yeah, I don't want to do that. Or that's not going to be part of my leadership toolkit because it's not effective or whatever it may be. So I think in kind of make a long answer short, or try to, every bit of advice you get is useful in some form or fashion. It's just whether or not you want it in the front of the wheel book or in the back of the wheel book.
That's a great visual. I really appreciate that. And for the listening audience or viewing audience, as Navy chiefs, we have these things called charge books that when we make Chief Petty Officer, and a charge book is in a sense a large wheel book. And instead of me as the new soon-to-be Chief Petty Officer writing, necessarily taking in feedback, and it's giving that charge book to a chief, senior chief, master chief, for some cases an officer, and allow them to put some leadership advice in their charge book. And the other thing that I think is vitally important, and we've actually talked about this with past guests, is how important it is to the act of writing something down. Even beyond, many of us have books that we'll highlight in the book. But I've even found highlighting and even then writing something in the margin, because I've gone back to books, so I got to highlight that. I don't know why that was important to me at the time. So I started highlighting and then writing why this was significant, so that when I go back, I'm like, oh yeah, now I remember that. So yeah, writing it down, the act of writing it kind of puts it to memory. So we in your 34 years, spend a couple, 2-3 minutes. Why'd you join the Navy? What'd you do real quick? And, what'd you do when you finished up?
Okay. Well, the why is, really, I always wanted to be part of the military. I think from the age of about 11 is my earliest recollection. I wanted to be in the military. So for the sake of keeping the story a little shorter, I ended up joining the Navy, which was to me the right decision. I think I had a pretty good run at it and a fairly good career. Not to mention that the Navy was going to allow me to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on computers. I was a kind of a computer geek in high school, into programming and things
What was
like
your
that.
first computer, David?
My first computer was a Radio Shack laptop. It was running an 8086 processor, which is the predecessor to the the 248s.
Yeah.
I had a 10 megabyte hard drive that I thought I would
Wow.
never use up. And it ran a version of DOS that was proprietary to Radio Shack. It was, yeah. I know I'm throwing out some old stuff. People are like, whoa. Yeah, I keep telling people, I joined the Navy to work on computers, but the computers I work on have less processing power than my watch has today.
Well, there's people who are wondering what Radio Shack is, probably. So,
that
anyways,
too. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, continue.
So I came in the Navy as a data systems technician. That's what we called them back then. And it was great training. We were, I think, the second longest school to nuke power. So I was in school almost 2 years, a year and a half between my A schools and C schools before I hit the fleet and was a display technician on my first ship, the USS Virginia, CGM 38.
CGM. Yeah, CGM.
Yeah, the new cruisers, which aren't around anymore either.
Mm-mm.
But I got to serve and do a lot of cool things throughout my career. I served in just about every community except submarines, which is cool because I'm not really into the sinking ship thing anyway. I give a lot of love to my submariner buddies out there. I couldn't do it. God bless you. Went into the command program about my 20-year point. So got selected for command senior chief, but the same year I got selected for master chief. So I went right in as a DCM and did 6 command tours to include a large installation, Naval Station Norfolk, aircraft carrier, the George H.W. Bush, and a couple others, and ended up retiring my last job as the Force Master Chief for Information Warfare. So I worked for the 3-star who was in charge of the information warfare community in the Navy, helping to lead, mentor, and motivate the roughly 56,000 sailors in the information warfare community. Enjoyed that immensely. It was a great way to go out. I had a lot of fantastic sailors I got to work with. There's just so many just amazing, smart, dedicated sailors in the information warfare community that, especially when you get to see what they do behind the curtains, with that high clearance. And it was just really kind of the highlight of my career, which was great. And then fortunately, I got hired by Veterans Lending Group. We're a VA specialty lender, where I'm the National Director of Education for the company. And so in that regard, I'm not out there doing loans and things like that, but I get to go out and teach vets and service members and their families about their home loan benefit and how to become their own best advocate in using that. So really kind of transitioned into a great job that allows me to still stay connected to the veteran community and continue to help, giving back by ensuring that vets and service members can get a home of their own.
Yeah, you mentioned the veteran community, and sometimes people think of veterans as those of us who have already transitioned out, when in fact veterans are also the active duty. And so you, through Veterans Lending Group, be able to provide some education training, like you said. I think at one time you've said, and I've heard others say, that less than 10%, that might even be a high number.
Actually, it's less than 18% of vets and service members use their benefit, which is, when you look at the roughly 19 million current vets and service members, less than 18% are actually using their benefit right now.
Well, and I only recently learned in the last couple of years that I always thought that using your VA home loan was a once and done, but it's not. And there's I don't want to turn this into a VA lending. I would hope that people would contact you guys. Well, but okay.
Well, but seriously though, we are here to provide this education for free. We just want to get the word out. So to wrap that up, we're available to help. And it's something else that David, you and I had talked about previously, and I don't know if this is an appropriate time to bring it up, but I mean, those who have made the transition out have so much information to share with those that are still serving. and or going through the transition themselves. And I think that tends to get lost in the sauce when, oh, they're already on the other side. They're not relevant anymore, when they are most certainly relevant because they've lived the transition process. Now we're on the other side, hopefully successfully. And we have a lot to feed back down into the active side to say, hey, this is what you need to be ready for.
Yeah. Let's talk about, and what you're talking about is something that is mentoring. And, throughout the military career, we've always had mentors. When you and I came in, we called them sea daddies, right? Who's your sea daddy?
Oh, yeah.
And that was only because at the time for warships, only men served on warships.
Sure.
But now we have, we all have a mentor. I can remember in 2003, I was embarked on board the Nimitz, and it was at that time the Navy came out with this: everyone will have a mentor, and you either pick one or we're going to give you one. Not the right model, but at least they recognized the value, right? And so looking at what you do through Veterans Lending Group, as well as other stuff that you do on the side, things that I do, even in my corporate job, I have mentors. But you're right. Your transition experience, you transitioned out during COVID. You and I both are fortunate that when we transitioned, a job kind of fell into our lap. But that's not the norm, right? But just because that happened doesn't mean we aren't experienced in helping others transition, and the relationships that you established and out of uniform. Go ahead.
I think an important part of that, David, when we're talking about the mentoring piece in relation to, we say jobs fell into our laps. I think we might be oversimplifying that a bit, but a lot of that comes from because we're out there networking, we're out there talking to people, we're growing our circles of influence, and that's how those jobs entered into our circles.
You're right.
So wasn't just luck or happenstance. There were directed efforts along the way to get there. Now,
even if those directed efforts weren't strategic, right? It just
exactly
part of that could just be our personality. Even in a certain degree, as a force master chief or region master chief, we just engage with people that.
I would actually say it was strategic. It may not have been tactical.
Okay,
because there was the big picture of the strategy. The strategy is just build the networks, and that's one of my biggest pieces of advice for those transitioning is make sure you're working on those networks, not just when you're entering into transition. Anybody who's serving now, even at the beginning of their career, networking is huge. But with that big strategic networking goal, the tactical goals are going to come into play.
So talk to us about your network that led you or led Veterans Lending Group to you.
Okay. It's almost like, what's that, 7 Orders of Kevin Bacon or whatever the story is.
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Well, I'd already put in my paperwork. I was early in my transition process, and my transition process was a very long one. I put in right at the 18-month point, and then I got extended it on active duty for 5 months due to COVID. So my transition was almost a full 2 years. But early on, I was on the computer, just doing the Facebook thing, trying to get some information, and I came across an article that from John Wayne Troxell. And if you're not familiar with that name, John Wayne Troxell was the third senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so the most senior enlisted guy in the military. And I'd been following John. I don't think we had met personally at that point, but we had mutual friends. Spud's, oh, shoot. I'm trying to remember his real name. I'm horrible with names. He's a Marine Sergeant Major. He was the PACOM SEL while I was the Region Master Chief for Hawaii. And, I knew Spuds, and Spuds was friends with John, and I knew that relationship. And because I knew the character of Spuds, and I knew he wouldn't befriend somebody who didn't have similar character. I said, okay, this John Wayne Troxell, and what I'd heard about him as well, said, okay, this guy's got to be the real deal. He wouldn't go to work for this company as their brand ambassador if he didn't believe in it. And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be needing a mortgage company because I'm getting out of Virginia, my last duty station, moving to Tennessee, my forever home. And through a series of conversations and phone calls, I ended up talking to Jamie Fisher, who is the branch manager for the Colorado Springs office, and who is licensed here in Tennessee. And since we were so early in the process, it was just like, hey, what are you thinking about? It was a really good conversation. It wasn't one of those like high pressure push sales type of things. And just led from that to, we talked about our service because Jamie's also a vet. He was Air Force and National Guard. And then, that led into, hey, have you ever thought about selling loans? And before you even get the word out of his mouth, he's like, nope, I want nothing to do with sales. That's the last thing I want to do. And then he mentioned, how about education? I'm like, okay. And that's one of the things that always been my passion is helping people, teaching sailors, giving them the information they need to be successful. And that really clicked. And one thing led to another. Before you know it, I was offered the job of the National Director of Education. So from knowing Spuds McKenzie way over here to connecting with Jamie and being offered a job on this side, it was really that network and those folks that I knew that got me there.
Yeah.
So hopefully that it wasn't too muddy.
Well, yeah, but I think one of the big takeaways is a word that you use is character, right?
Yeah.
When we reach into people, even if you look in LinkedIn, you could look, who do these people follow? What kind of information do they post on social media? That speaks a lot to an individual's character, or for a company that you're with. I'm sure that just because a person of high character worked for Veterans Lending Group, before you assumed it, you probably did your due diligence just to look at the reviews, check out the company, make sure it is a company you want to be associated with.
I just remember the name, Sergeant Major Spadaro.
Okay, Spuds.
Spadaro. Yeah, Spuds Spadaro. Good man, really good guy.
And part of that character building and the mentoring is not burning bridges, right? And I will tell you, sometimes we don't intentionally burn bridges, but bridge burning can happen by not responding, not returning emails, phone calls, things like that. It's kind of, I always look at when you borrow money from somebody and then you don't pay it back for a while, and then you start getting embarrassed about it, so you don't reach out to them and let them know, and then the awkward moment when you see each other, because and things like that. But that can happen, and even in my corporate job, where like your motivation for VLG to educate, so you could potentially tap into some friends and shipmates, other services. But it's like, oh, wait a minute, Dave. I knew who you were in uniform, but now you're one of those guys outside the blue line that you tell me you're not going to try to sell anything, but I'm sure you really are. And it's like, well, but it goes back to character. And I think based on the character and our relationships, people like, okay, I trust you. And so even then, but then there's those that have gone before us that they abused that. They did that bait and switch.
And that's why one of the challenges that I have in my current job in getting this information down to the active duty member is that, I'm not allowed to operate on base. And that was because of those before me had abused that privilege. And that was a big bridge burnt for many of us. So it's unfortunate. So we try to work the other angles to get that information out there to those folks who really need it. Because when you've got only 19% of the vets and service members out there using this extremely valuable benefit to get them and themselves into a home and maybe build some wealth through property ownership throughout their career. Because like you said, you can have more, you can use your VA loan more than once. You can have multiple VA loans at any given time. Yeah, it's amazing. One sergeant major that I knew that had been a client at the company, every duty station along the way, he had bought a house using his benefit. So when he retired, he had 5 homes, all earning income for him. He never had to work a day in his life after that. But that was someone who really was far seeing and used this to his advantage. So it's anyway, but yeah, it's
No,
unfortunate when you guys like us are on this other side, but there's that wall that was erected by some people before us who didn't have that or didn't maintain that level of ethics that we're expected to have.
and and now I will say that I appreciate all branches of the military that vet to make sure that organizations um, don't come in and abuse that. And so that doesn't mean we're not out there, though. That doesn't mean that a go to whatever on installation of your branch for some of that, whether it's home buying seminars, financial seminars, counseling, all that kind of stuff. But there's a host of other organizations, a lot of them nonprofit, that are outside the blue lines across the nation. And where I'm at in San Diego, because of the depth of both the active duty and the retired military community, there are so many services that are available for people.
I've had this conversation with several people, but it just came up again this morning. I was over in Chattanooga attending the Southeast Tennessee Veterans Coalition, kind of a monthly meeting of veteran organizations. And I was talking with one of the reps there because we're getting ready to do a Sequatchie Valley Veteran Resource Fair here in where I live in Southeast Tennessee. And the one thing that I pointed out, especially you're going through the transition myself just recently, is not that there's a lack of resources out there, but there are sometimes too many.
Yeah.
And especially like you were talking about the San Diego area, and I retired out of the Norfolk area, so we know what that's like, right? I mean, there's just so much, and how do you distill it down to the things you need? And I think going back to the earlier comment, guys like us, I think this is where we have an important role to play to say, hey, this is how we get you connected. If I know what your needs are, I can connect you to the right resource. And that goes to mentoring as well, because that's part of mentoring, right?
Part of mentoring.
I'm going to help you based upon my experience and the things that I went through. So you're going to be better off than I was.
Yeah. Well, and just it's like they may not, maybe somebody comes to you and I don't know if your organization is, you mentioned the one guy who was licensed in Tennessee, although he was located in Colorado. If you have people licensed throughout the nation, but let's just for conversation's sake, you don't. But you meet somebody who's looking to go to a state that you don't, people that you could connect them with, because as a mentor, it's not about, oh, listen, if VLG can't help you, I'm not here for you. No,
right.
You meet people in the industry. Of course you want to help. It's not that competitive. It's not the same with veterans. And that's what I love about us. It's like even the company I work for, there's competitors out there. But listen, if you're not with the company I work for and you're happy with the competitor, why are you going to leave? Loyalty goes a long way.
Yeah.
A long way.
Yeah. So, and we feel the same way. More than 73% of our employees are either veterans or military affiliated family members. So that we kind of have that, frame of mind already is, we're here to help, whatever it takes to get you into a home, we're going to do that, or connect you to the resource you need too, because we do a lot of that as well. But that's because of that mentality that's built into us is we want to help. If you're a brother or sister, in arms, we're going to do what we can to help you out.
Even Liberty Military Housing, who used to be Lincoln Military Housing in Southern California, the West Coast.
Yep.
I remember talking to them years ago, and their motivation often is we look at our housing as a transition before the family gets into their home. They get married, they got to pay their BAH, they get used to what it's like, and then their goal is to move them out of military housing into their home ownership, right? It's not like, no, we want to keep you in and all this, not their motivation. It's great. Yeah, it's mentoring. We can put that mentoring hat over so much of what we do. And I don't, it's not the same in the civilian community. There's a lot of self-help books. People pay a lot of money for life coaches and join the military. You can get it for free. What are you going to say?
I know. I just know more than a few people who are really into that. And I have my own philosophy on it. I'm a big believer in you are who you are. I don't think, deep down, you can change some of the aspects of yourself. You can change maybe some of the appearances, but deep down, it's really difficult to change who you are fundamentally.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if you build a house, you're not going to change the foundation that much once the house is built.
Sure.
You can do some things to the house. You can add on. You can change this. You can repaint, but you're not changing the foundation.
No, you can change out the furniture.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's why when I hear people with all that self-help stuff, I'm like,
yeah, I when I went through my John Maxwell training for teacher, leader, coach.
I do like Maxwell. I'm a fan of Maxwell. I'm a fan of Maxwell.
Me too. And when I went through the coaching pipeline as well, to learn one thing that what I learned about that, and again, it ties into mentoring. Coaching isn't there to solve my problems for me and tell me how I'm supposed to do things. A coach is supposed to your point, it's in me on how to solve my problem. The coach is able to ask certain questions and take things in to get me to solve my own problems.
Yeah. No, there's some other questions that you guys have given me, which really kind of lead to that. When it comes to mentoring and selecting a mentor, because you don't want someone to solve your problems as a protege or a mentee. Yeah, I'm old school, so I stick with protege. That's why when selecting a mentor, you don't necessarily want your buddy or your friend or someone who's going to stroke your back and say that everything's going to be fine. You want that person who's also going to be brutally honest when need be, and is going to give you information, kind of the lead the horse to water analogy. I'm going to get you to the watering hole, but you got to figure out how to drink, right? The other example I used to use, because I'm big into woodworking and carpentry, I can give you the tools for your toolbox, but I'm not going to build the house for you. That you have to do that, and that's because that's the only way you're going to learn. So I think in selecting that mentor, if someone's actively out pursuing one, pick someone who's you can trust, has integrity, is respected, and is going to be brutally honest with you when need be.
And I think it's important to have multiple mentors. It's civilian, military. When I was on active duty, I had people that were my juniors, right? Which as a command master chief, especially, it's like, that's kind of, so I would keep it in the chief's mess. I wouldn't necessarily go down to some E5s. But I had some chiefs that I trusted and gave them the permission. And as a civilian, I still have those. It's funny. One of our earlier guests, Nate Bricker, he talks about, so he's a retired senior chief, and he's now at a job. His boss is one of his E5s from active duty days, right? So, when we talk about burning bridges and everything else, and mentorship and all, you just never know, who that person. But you know what? That kid, that young man, transitioned out before Nate, had that job, did it. So when Nate comes out, he's like, "Hey, brother, I need help." Not hook a brother up, but humble yourself to you in there done that. I can remember when I was an RM1, and we got this young ensign on board, and he comes in to watch. I was working in the message center. He comes in at like 2 a.m, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you doing here, sir?" He says, "Well, I'm going to be the radio officer. I need to learn what you guys do and understand it. And I'm not just going to come in on the day shift." And he came up in the middle of the night when it was a little slower, and we were able to take time. I'm like, wow. So here we're going back. So this was like in the early 90s at that command. So 30 years later, I still remember that.
And there's probably a couple of things going on in the background there. Either one, he's an exceptionally smart and wise young man, or two, he had a really good chief giving him some good direction.
We're going to say both. Yeah. So, well, listen, David, we've been talking for a while here, and we could keep going on, but
oh yeah,
we do need to wrap this up. So you've been listening to a conversation with David Carter, 34-year Navy Command Master Chief, retired as a Force Master Chief. And we've just been sharing our thoughts and experiences on mentoring. And Dave, part of Veterans Lending Group, a nationwide organization that really values the military community and wants to educate our military and take advantage of their VA home loan. So please, we'll put in the notes below how to get a hold of VLG, and if you want to talk specifically to David, that'll be in there too. And I encourage you, wherever you are in the world, if you're looking for training, I know David does it in person as well as virtual.
Oh, yeah.
Virtual
We do
is
a lot of virtual nowadays.
A lot of virtual. We're the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. We are keeping our two main leadership courses, Foundry class for E6s and the Leading Petty Officer Academy workshop for E5s. We're remaining virtual because, listen, we can have students from all over the world Zoom in to participate. So listen, as we close, Dave, I'd just like to ask the one final kind of fun question. In the beginning, we just talked about worst leadership advice. Just wondering, maybe if there was any leadership decision you made along the way in your career that you kind of dodged a bullet. It's like, oh man, that could have gone south real bad, but I got away with it. And what'd you learn from it?
The one I remember so distinctly, and it wasn't necessarily, maybe not necessarily dodged a bullet, but definitely a hard lesson learned. I was a brand new chief. I was stationed on the George H.W. Bush. The Truman. Get my carriers mixed up after a while. Plank owner on the Truman, and I had been sent down to take over a different division. I just made chief, along with my buddy, my running mate, and our combat systems officer said, "Hey, I want you to go take over this division." And it had been a division that wasn't normally affiliated with combat systems, so there was a lot of because of some restructuring within the airland community. There was just a lot of tension there. So we were sent down to kind of bring them into the fold, right, and get them on board with the program. So there's a lot of back and forth there. And there was a lot of resentment against us for that too. So, and I was doing something that was an email chain of some sort, and I'd emailed back to this, at the time, an IT2. And his response back to me, I took some umbrage to. So instead of going to deal with it right away, since I was on email, I responded, say, "Hey, this is not right." And it kind of blew up. And I ended up putting the sailor on report for insubordination. Well, as that was going through the chain, it really kind of became very clear to me that I could have handled that so much differently. If I had just gotten away from my computer, walked down to the shop, because at the time I think I was in the maintenance shop, which is on the O3 level, and the ADP shop is down on the 4th deck. So 7 decks there between the two. So if I had just gotten off my butt and gone down to the shop and pulled the sailor aside, we might have been able to hash things out, but it blew way out of proportion. And from that particular lesson, I learned nothing beats a face-to-face communication, especially when it comes to email. And if you're emailing something and there starts to be some passion in there or some emotion, get off the keyboard, log out, walk away, because nothing good comes out of trying to resolve an emotional issue via an unemotional means. And again, that interpersonal communication between going knee to knee, nose to nose with an individual and say, "Hey, what's going on here? How do we work this out?" is invaluable. So to me, that was one of my earliest, most important lessons, especially as a young chief, on how to deal with issues, that it has to be done face to face. You can't do it over electronic means.
I love that story because that's mentoring, right? You just provided a great piece of mentoring advice.
Both my sons are in the Navy now. My oldest is an officer, a flight officer. My youngest is an FC2. And I tell both of them, say, one, don't put anything on email that you wouldn't write to your mother in a postcard. And two, don't do anything emotional on the keyboard. Get off the keyboard and go talk to somebody.
Good advice. Well, David, thanks for your service. Thanks for your friendship. Thanks for what you're doing to give back to the military community. And thanks for joining us today. And
My
to
pleasure.
everyone else, thank you for tuning in to Lead On Lessons from Military Leaders. I'm David Deary with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. Please check out our website at www.enlistedleadershipfoundation.org. And until next time, have a great day.
Produced by Podcast Architects.